Bicara Supply Chain, highlighting and showcasing solutions for the most complex challenges facing the industry in 21st century by our team of subject matter experts and mentors. Broadcasting every week, all year round, we will present the most up-to-date series of podcasts and webinars.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Bicara Supply Chain. This is Nur Hadi, your host. And with me now, Suuchi Ramesh. She is a founder and CEO at the Suuchi Corporation. It is a next generation supply chain management platform. Suuchi software, the Suuchi GRID, allows businesses to manage the entire supply chain from product ideation through distribution in a single system while collecting valuable data to make informed business decisions. Okay, so thank you for joining us, Suuchi, and welcome to Bicara Supply Chain.
Thank you for having me.
All right, cool. So this is an episode number 101, and today's topic is the role of data in a supply chain moving forwards. But before we jump into the discussion, can you please tell me a bit about yourself? And how did you decide to build a supply chain platform like Suuchi after you spent many years in analytics companies?
Yeah, so my background is software. I'm a software engineer, also did my MBA in software. And I spent a little over 10 years in predictive data analytics companies. I started with corporate and then went on to join 2 different venture-backed tech companies in the predictive data analytics space. So I had a front row seat to witnessing what it took to scale fast growth B2B enterprises, serving Fortune 500 companies, but also saw what it took to build fast growth cultures, taking large markets and converting them to really taking problem statements and converting them to solutions for companies. So in starting Suuchi Inc., saw that there was a huge opportunity with supply chains. If you look across the world, no matter what industry you take, every industry has a supply chain.
Yeah.
And then if you look at each of those supply chains, the fascinating thing is they're all massive markets, but they still are stuck in the past in many ways. They have legacy processes, and the way the digital investments have been made is at best fragmented, and at worst you don't even have investments at different parts of the supply chain. So we saw the opportunity or a white space for putting together something very simple and intuitive that was very critical. Because supply chains, when we say are massive, what does that mean? A lot of participants. They tend to engage many people across the upstream and downstream value chain with many different skill sets. So there was an opportunity to build an intuitive system that could connect across all of these participants and across the entire length of the supply chain, and thereby provide an answer to digitization and simple data collection. So that's how we began the company.
All right, fantastic. Okay, talking about data in the supply chain, Suuchi, what is this exactly and why is it so important?
It's important I'd probably collapse that down into three main reasons.
Right.
I think the biggest opportunity for companies to make progress against metrics that matter, both qualitative and quantitative metrics, lies in the supply chain. So much of a business's success depends on successfully executing a supply chain strategy. And so that means when it comes to speed to market, revenue, profits, and then also qualitative metrics like sustainability, employee happiness, customer satisfaction, they're all directly and indirectly tied to supply chain. And I think companies have not been able to optimize and max the value because they don't have visibility across the whole supply chain. So the first reason is, how do you give somebody a strategy to digitize? Yeah. So everybody talks about the importance of digitization across supply chain. And I think companies and executives understand that it is very critical, but there isn't really a how. How do you do that? And so we give a very simple answer to, with a quick time to value, to digitize everybody across the supply chain. So the first reason is you can't start making progress and maximizing a supply chain strategy until you start to digitize, right? Because if processes are analog, you are unable to capitalize on improvements with supply chain. So then once you digitize, the second reason that this is important is data collection. Is oftentimes decisions are made in silos. What that means is that you look at revenue data and then you look at, okay, what are the top SKUs to push out? Or you look at sourcing data and you say, okay, these were my top suppliers. But these decisions should not be made independently, right? Because once data is married together across different parts of the supply chain, the impact of the analytics can be tremendous, right? So the first we spoke about, let's try to digitize. The second reason is let's harmonize once you digitize the data across the different parts of the supply chain. So for example, if you can have your supplier data connect with, say, your sales data, right? Then you look at successful SKUs, not just in terms of sales, but then you look at successful SKUs through the lens of not just top selling SKUs, but the SKUs that have the least time to market or the least speed to market, right? And so both of these parameters are important. So suddenly you have these ahas by combining different parts of the supply chain. The third reason is cultural. And I think this is probably, to me, the most important reason why this is critical, is you want to have everybody with a seat at the table. So many times investments are very snooty. What I mean by that is investments in one part of the supply chain only allow for people, typically allow for people and executives in those parts of the supply chain to jump into a system. And I think there's value in having a single source of truth that democratizes access, and that not only allows everybody a seat at the table, but it also culturally empowers successful supply chains and promotes employee happiness as well. Mm-hmm. So I'd say those are three of the top reasons.
All right, cool. Let's move with another question. What do you think data can do to improve supply chain operations moving forward?
It's all about simple use cases and attacking them with data. I don't think the use of data has to be rocket science, quite the opposite. It's when folks talk about analytics, I think it's like this haze of, it's this cloudy haze of, oh my God, that seems complicated, but it is really not, right? So the answer to that is very specific to every company. What are the use cases you want to tackle? What are your top priorities? So starting with the top 3 business priorities and then distilling them down to use cases. And then from there on, looking at how you could use the data to improve each of those use cases, right? So having said that, I think whatever the use case will be, let's take some examples. We spoke about reducing speed to market. Let's say another use case is supply chain diversification, just having a wider supplier base, tracking it, measuring it, and reducing risk. A third could be promoting and improving sustainability metrics, right? Whatever those are, I think no matter what your use case, when you look at data, by digitizing your supply chain and just using that to measure historical performance, you get to 60 to 80% of the target goal per use case. Mm-hmm. And what do I mean by that is before you get into even predictive analytics and learning systems, there's a lot of value that you could derive by looking at very intuitive reports that take historical data and give you powerful insights.
Yeah.
So if you want to reduce speed to market while improving revenue, right? And let's say that's one of your use cases. Mm-hmm. Just by comparing historic data and measuring how you did, it can give you ahas. So for example, maybe you are plotting your time to market by supplier. And when you do that, when you have a visual representation of that, you know that you may need to move some styles to a different set of suppliers versus the ones you've been historically using, right? And so making those changes, if your goal is to reduce speed to market by 20%, just looking at historical data could let you, say, improve speed to market by 15%. So leveraging data does not have to be rocket science. So I guess to summarize, it starts by identifying the strategic priorities for a business, distilling them down to use cases, and then saying, let me start simple. Let me start by digitizing, mm-hmm. then collect collecting the data and then choosing some very simple intuitive reports to start measuring, because I can't improve if I can't measure.
All right, cool. So let's talk more detail about alignment. So how to organize the data operation in alignment with a supply chain strategy, Suuchi?
Yeah, well, look, it's a great question, and I think the answer is also a little cultural. I think companies have to recognize. So let's say you're in a chemicals manufacturing company, right?
Right.
And let's say you have another company that's auto parts manufacturing. Let's say there's a third company that manufactures beauty products, skincare. I think at the end of the day, all of these companies have to realize that internally, they're actually data companies that happen to be manufacturing chemicals, or they're data companies that happen to be manufacturing and distributing auto parts. And so there has to be a cultural recognition and an internal branding, which is internal to the company. The data is the new oil, right? So I think that not really one team that's a data team versus all the other teams are separated. I think every department, a supply chain team and an operations team, a sourcing team, procurement team, they should, the data collection and distilling and measurement should be inherent within every team. I think that's the way it should be structured. We've typically seen that where you have a centralized data org and then you have your separate business divisions, those tend to be less successful than, let's say, it's decentralized. And or there's at least this constant communication between the centralized data division and all the other orgs. I think at the end of the day, there has to be a recognition that data is the new oil, and there has to be a regular measurement and of data, and there has to be an alignment that there have to be investments in systems that allow data sets across all the different organizations to be communicating with one another, right? So if it's not possible to have a data thesis resting in every department, that's ideal. At the very least, you want regular communication, and you want that centralized data department to be erring on the side of excessive communication and collaboration with all of the departments.
Awesome. Okay, so can you also please provide a few examples, one or two examples, on how supply chain platforms help companies to manage the entire end-to-end supply chains by elaborating the role of data?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a lot of power in connecting data sets across different parts of the supply chain. We already spoke about that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I find it very magical that you could have such ahas and improvements by just having your sourcing and procurement, say inbound data, communicate with your outbound logistics and DC data and revenue data.
Right.
And again, we spoke about this, but none of this has to be rocket science. It's about collecting it, and then it's about having all those data sets work together so you have insights. Now, in terms of examples, we'll take some use cases that different companies have leveraged to drive impact. We spoke about a few of them already. Some that I find fascinating is measuring the amount of communication and collaboration, and looking at the impact of the communication and collaboration on revenue margins and speed to market. So when you connect across the entire supply chain, you're also able to measure how different entities are communicating and collaborating. So one of the things that we're able to do through the Suuchi grid is you replace email, you replace all analog communication and move it onto the grid. So you're able to actually quantify how much communication and collaboration is happening and at what times of day and across which departments. And we've seen that you could really correlate the amount of communication and collaboration going on with the direct impact on increase in revenue and a decrease in speed to market, right? Because improvement in communication is a good thing, but when everybody's accountable on the same platform, it does have a direct impact on the business metrics that matter. So that's one example. The other example is sustainability. A lot of companies know that this is important to their end retailers or to their end consumers, depending on who they're selling to. But they struggle to define what sustainability means so far as their brand is concerned, right? How do you define that? How do you quantify what sustainability means? And how do you publish that to the outside world? So one of the other ways that you could leverage in examples are defining sustainability, so quantifying that. So it could be my factories, how long do they take? So if they take less time, there is less wastage.
Yeah.
So once you digitize it, you're actually able to quantify and then take a stand on saying, this is what sustainability means to us as a company, and hence this is what it means when you buy from us, right? So by digitizing, companies have ways to define what sustainability means to them, and that's been really great to see as well. Of course, we could go on. We spoke about some examples, but these are a couple more.
All right, cool, fantastic. Actually, I still have a number of questions, Suuchi, but very unfortunate we are running out of time. So thanks so much for sharing today. I really enjoyed the discussion with you. See you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Nadi. It was a pleasure to be on. Thank you.
At Bicara Supply Chain, we are committed to driving global perspective to embrace technological adaptation in improving process efficiencies. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share Bicara Supply Chain. And stay tuned for the latest updates. To learn more, visit our website www.bicarasupplychain.com. Thank you for listening to us. We look forward to seeing you at our next episode.